Welcome to the second of a series of webinars by Trade Malta. My name is Joe Schembri, I'm Chief Officer for Trade Malta. Before we start, I'd like to remind you to switch off your cameras and audio, put your audio on mute, though I can see that most of you have done that already. For those of you joining us for the first time, Trade Malta is hosting a series of webinars together with our strategic partners, HSBC, to try to diffuse knowledge and information to companies based in Malta interested in internationalization. At Trade Malta, as you know, we offer various packages of either financial assistance for companies to travel and develop business in meeting people one-to-one, but also we provide information. We have a portal which is full of information, which is of interest to exporters based in Malta, so feel free to visit www.trademalta.org for this information. Every Thursday from last week, we're hosting these webinars. Last week, we spoke about artificial intelligence and its role in internationalization. Today, we're dealing with networking, effective networking. But we have other sessions coming up, including one on digital marketing strategies. Next week, one introducing Namibia as a market on the 16th of July, and a session on supply chain and trade finance by an expert from HSBC on the 23rd of July. Before I introduce the speaker, the guest we have today, I'd like to explain just some basic housekeeping rules. Apart from keeping your audio and video switched off, please, and that's mostly because of sound. We have today, for example, over 60 participants in this webinar. Feel free to ask questions. Feel free to ask questions by using the chat function in Microsoft Teams. I will be reading out the questions to the speaker at the end of the presentation. So I'll do a little introduction, which I'm doing now. I'll pass on to the speaker, and following that, we'll take questions from the chat function. We will also provide the presentation on our website later on. We will be recording the session, and we'll be recording the session to make it available on our socials and on our website later on. However, in reading the questions from the chat, I will not be revealing the name of those asking the question, so feel free to ask any question you'd like, because the names in that sense will be not revealed. We'll be, obviously, as you know, we're broadcasting these sessions, and we have assistance from Studio 7 in doing this, so thanks for them as well. Today we are talking about a topic which is very central to internationalization, because a lot of internationalization starts from contacts, from personal relationships. We want to talk about effective networking. We've organized a lot of sessions, a lot of networking sessions as part of what we do at Trade Malta. And we've seen many people over the years just dishing out business cards, in an attempt to build, networking. And we thought, we're sure there's a better way of doing this. And this is why we wanted to do a session on effective networking. We're going to be discussing this better way of doing, effective networking. So I'd like to invite Jess Camilleri, who's next to me here, from Think Talent. Jess has been a certified coach and trainer for many years and has worked with a lot of organizations and business leaders, helping them to communicate better, to lead their organizations better. He has degrees from our university as well as from the University of Reading in the UK, and is also a certified and accredited coach by the Leadership and Management Institute in London. Jess, great to have you here.
Great to be here, Joe.
In fact, the first thing I wanted to ask you, give us some background about yourself before I give you over and you can do the proper session.
Well, my career path can only be described as being a bit of a zigzag, to be quite honest. But that has also helped me to touch with a number of different organizations in different contexts. Also, I've also had the great opportunity to work both locally and overseas. And I've worked with organizations who themselves have had to deliver their services, in particular, more than products, to a global audience. So I'm fully aware of the importance of networking, not just on a local scale, but also on a global scale. I'm a firm believer in communication, especially face-to-face communication, which trumps pretty much all other types of communication, especially when you want to build relationships, which are, I believe, the basis of trust and ultimately of also commerce.
Relationship is what it's about. Last week, I was introducing, we had a session on artificial intelligence, on having these predictive models. But as you put it, I guess nothing, beats and remains essential as, one-to-one communication and doing that effectively. So without further ado, Jess, I'll leave it to you. I'll remind the participants once again, please key in, type in your questions. I will be taking note of the questions and reading them out to Jess to be able to address them later. So Jess, floor is yours.
Thank you, Joe. So good morning to everyone again, and I'd like to start off with a little bit of a cliche, I call it, okay? And it's a cliche which I think here in Malta we tend to use quite well, right? It's not what you know, it's who you know. But this morning I'd like to add a little bit to this cliche. It's not what you know, that's true, it's who you know, but possibly also who they know too. And I'd like to use this as an introduction to our topic today of networking, which I believe is essential for people who want to do business, just like yourselves, but also who want to establish relationships. And ultimately, selling is really about relationships, isn't it? And the idea of networking, if you had to Google networking, you'll probably find it under two different aspects. One which is the social kind of networking we're talking about today, but also you'll find a lot of material talking about a very different type of networking, one which is mainly to do with telecommunications. And although I don't intend to get into the telecommunications side, I'd like to share with you actually a concept coming from the idea of the concept of networking in telecommunications. And there is a law which in telecommunications which is called Metcalfes Law, after the person who came up with this idea. And this actually states that the value of a network equals the number of users squared. Now, you don't have to be a maths graduate to understand the idea behind this law. That the idea that the greater the number of people in a network, the greater the value of that network. So applying this law, and a network, for example, that is twice as large, okay, will actually be 4 times as valuable, 2 squared, okay, 2 times 2. Visually, if you can see from this slide, for example, 2 telephones can only make 1 connection, right? If you had 5 telephones, that can make actually 10 connections. 12, and you have 66 connections. Okay, so it's very much to do with this idea behind networks. Networking is a concept which has found itself to be very central, not only in telecommunications, but also in establishing business ties, and that is exactly what we'll be looking at this morning. So we say the future belongs to those who can network. And various studies show that yes, it's very important to be experts at what you do. So the what that you manufacture, that you put together in terms of products or services is extremely important. But that is only about 10%. For about 30%, from studies we know, that is about how you do it, how you make your product, your service, in particular, unique, right? But that only accounts for about 40%. Studies have shown that the rest, which is the 60%, is really about how visible you are. Who knows about you? Who sees you? Who knows about these products and services that you're so proud of and that you would like all the world to know about and obviously buy from you? Well, this is where a lot of organizations, a lot of leaders and organizations say, well, that's marketing's job. So I get myself a marketing manager or a marketing executive, depends on the size of the organization, and we abdicate this, I would say, responsibility. I would say network is a leadership responsibility. We tend to abdicate this responsibility that we have of networking to the marketing department. And we say, that's their job. Well, it's much more than that. This is where networking comes in. And I'm going to give you 4 reasons why networking should be at the top of your list when it comes to your responsibilities. We tend to focus a lot on results and KPIs. We tend to focus a lot on managing, and yet, unfortunately, we don't pay enough attention to networking. Well, I'm going to give you 4 reasons, which I hope will compel you to put networking right at the top of your priorities. And the first one is that some of the best opportunities are never advertised. Some of the best opportunities, be they good jobs, good opportunities to trade, good opportunities to buy, to sell to, they are typically not advertised. So it's important for you to be able to ensure that you are not just dependent on your marketing campaigns. I'm not saying those marketing campaigns shouldn't be there. They should be there, but most of the time they are not enough. Social, personal networking is what will make a big difference. The other reason is that even though we're in the 21st century, people still buy from people that they know and trust. Look at yourself, have a look at yourself. You know, even the simplest of things, you tend to go to people who you know. Why do you do that? Well, because you've established a personal contact with them. You trust them. That is what relationships are all about. So despite, maybe your competitors having much bigger budgets for marketing, you can actually, beat them at that game because people know you, because you have networked tirelessly. So that's a second reason why you should be networking tirelessly. The third is that some of the best deals are as a result of your relationship with suppliers. Sometimes it's not about selling, sometimes it's about buying. Most of you will also need to get the best deals for you to be able to provide your services, your products, etc. And there again, it is about finding the best deals, most of which are not the deals that you find on the advertising campaigns of people. It is making sure that you negotiate with somebody who knows you, who trusts you, who knows that they have a relationship with you. The fourth and final reason I'm going to give you this morning to network tirelessly is that, as they say, usually they say fortune favors the bold or the brave, right? I'm here going to improvise on that by turning it a bit round. Fortune favors the well-networked. Why is that? Well, the broader your networks, the better your networks, the more opportunities you are going to stumble upon. And that means that the likelihood that you will actually find good opportunities for you to trade, for you to sell, for you to do business is higher. And that's why people who are well networked, they tend to feel themselves as being lucky. So it's not about luck, really. It's about, I would say, the law of averages, isn't it? It's also about being able to tap into all the networks, all the relationships that you have built up over the years. And this is exactly why good networkers, they seem to be lucky. Actually, it's not just about luck. It's about they have invested a lot of their time, a lot of their energy into these relationships. So, essentially, what are we talking about? We're talking about this concept of networking. Well, networking helps you make connections in a personal way. This is the main difference I find with marketing. Okay? While marketing tends to be much more about your products and your services, here you are the brand. Okay? You are embodying all that your company embodies, for all that your company stands for, the values, the purpose. All this is embodied in you. And this is done so that you can make relationships, build relationships of support and respect. So essentially, you can see that networking doesn't start off from a sale, it starts off from a relationship. It doesn't go straight for the jugular, as we say in English, but actually starts off by building a network of support and mutual respect. Why? So that there can be mutual benefit. And I'll be referring to this later on, the importance of mutual benefit that underpins all our efforts to networking. So networking, as Joe mentioned earlier, is not so much about dishing out business cards. okay? It's much more than that. It is about building relationships for mutual benefit. So let's get a little bit down to specifics. How does one actually build one's network? There's a great book which has become one of my favorites. It's a book by a guy called Simon Sinek. It's called Start With Why. And this is exactly what I would like to ask you to. When you start networking, you always start with why, with the reason why I want to network. What are my objectives for networking? Is it to be able to sell? Is it to be able to buy? Is it to be able to influence? Is it to be able to learn? There can be a number of different reasons why you are going to put a lot of effort into your networking. Being clear on your objective, those of you who have studied management know the importance of objective setting. You know, it is essential to you starting to identify the real reason, the core reason why you are going to network. That pretty much underpins then the what and then the how as well. So you start off with being clear in your mind, why do I want to network? Now this can be very different for all of you. But having that clarity will enable you to be much more effective in your networking than if you just had a vague idea of, I'm going to a networking session because that's what everyone else is doing, or I've been invited. Where do I start? Well, you start with what you have. You start with your existing network. People say charity begins at home, or even network. They begin with what you already know. So think about people who you already know. Okay, you don't have to wait until you get invited. I know at the moment, for example, networking events are not exactly very popular at the moment because of social distancing still being very, very prevalent. So think about who you already know. Even if you think you don't know anyone, quote unquote, important, it doesn't matter. A good networker will be able to forge links with new people, building increasingly useful relationships as he or she goes along. So start off with your own network. Start off by writing down a list of people you know. Okay, very quickly, just look at your current or past colleagues, look at customers, clients you already have, look at suppliers, people you've met at seminars, events, look at people on committees. You might also be involved outside your work in different kinds of committees. They could be anything from band clubs to sports associations, anything that you might be a member of. Look at your school, your university acquaintances. And build up a list of the people who you know. Now, a lot of people ask me, but I can list every member of my form when I was at school. That doesn't mean I know them. So that brings up a very interesting point. What does knowing somebody really mean? And I think here, what I'm referring to is knowing someone means that you can call them and they don't go, Jez who? So if you can literally call someone, cold, and just by telling them, my name is Jez Camilleri, they say, oh, hi, long time no see. Oh, I haven't seen you since school. They can immediately connect, the name to you, then I would say that is a connection. You have exchanged some sort of communication already. This is where I'd like to play a little activity, really, play a little game with you. And this is where I'm going to invite you to actually use the chat to do this. So there is a concept that is known as the 6 degrees of separation. This concept has been made popular. I remember first hearing about it in the 90s, I believe. First from a play by the same name, and then eventually by a film starring Will Smith. Some of you old enough, at least my age, might remember that film. And the central idea behind this film and the play originally was that we are connected by no less than 6 people to anyone in the world. And although it started off being like an urban legend, this has been recently actually proved by Microsoft, who analyzed a lot of data and actually proved, well, actually nearly proved, because they came up with 6.6 persons between you and any other person on Earth. So I'd like you using the chat, for a moment, just think about how many degrees of separation are there between you and Donald Trump, President of the United States. Okay, so think about it. Who do you know and who that knows someone, that knows someone, that knows someone, that knows someone that knows Donald Trump? So think about that for a moment. And I'd like you, if you can send some feedback back to me, use the chat function to tell me whether it is 2, maybe you know Donald Trump very closely, or maybe it's more closely around 4, 5, or 6. I can tell you, for example, that I am only 2 degrees of separation from Donald Trump because my cousin knows somebody who works at the White House who should, I believe, know Donald Trump quite well. Let's hope he has a job for the foreseeable future at the White House. So if you get to know me, you're only 3 degrees of separation. So you can see how we are all very much connected. And we are living in a very globalized, very networked society, very networked global society, that it is very easy, especially nowadays, like never before, to be able to network with pretty much anyone and everyone. So this is the power of networking.
We do have someone who wrote something in the chat, someone who's 3 degrees of separations away. So I thought of taking her name for later. But we have even more. Yeah, and another 3 degrees of separation.
There you go. You probably never thought about being so close to Donald Trump. Now, whether you agree with his policies or not, that's a different matter. Yeah. But you can get in touch through 3 hops to one of the world's most powerful people on earth. Think about that. That is the power of networks. Okay? So let's move on to the next steps. The next step is about how do I go ahead? Okay, so I've got a list. I've got a list of all the people I know. What do I do with it? Well, this is where you need to organize it. This is where it takes a little bit of organization. It takes a little bit of prioritization. Organize that list according to your goals. So who on your list can best help you achieve your goals? Notice this is why it's important to set your goal before looking at your list, because otherwise it just remains a very long list of people. And once you identify that, okay, ask yourself, why should they help me? Why should these people on my list, help me out? Well, this is where you need to give them a reason to help you. And the best way to give people on that list a reason to help you is to apply what we call the golden rule of networking. And the golden rule of networking actually comes from the Bible. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It comes from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 6. Concentrate on what you think you can do for other people. This is something which I will mention again later on, because I believe this kind of mindset is really the right mindset when you are networking. Because people don't like networking with people who they see immediately, who give them the impression that they just want to take. As we mentioned earlier when we were defining networking, it's a mutual benefit you're looking at. So make sure that you are constantly identifying, how can I help these people, before you expect them to help you. So ask not only how you can benefit, but possibly how can I help this person? How do I know someone maybe in my network that might be able to give him or her a push forward? You can also think, could this person be beneficial to someone in my network? Right? So you can see it's a mutual benefit that we're looking at. How can I integrate him or her into my network, introduce them to other people? So this, I believe, is a very, very useful, makes networking so much easier. It will also calm you down because the focus is not on you so much. It's more about on the other person. So let's say you're going to reach out to people, okay? How do I reach out to people? And one of the best opportunities for reaching out are networking events. And Joe mentioned earlier how Trade Malta organizes networking events. It's very important that you look out for. You are constantly on the lookout for all opportunities for networking events, because a networking event puts you in touch with typically, sort of like-minded people who are there also wishing to network. So it's not like a cold call, is it? It's not like, phoning somebody, completely at random. This is you're in the same space with someone who is also looking to network. So I believe networking events have great value where it comes to increasing your network. So I'm going to look at now how to network. The actual how. And I'm going to be splitting it up into 5. They're called the 5 I's of networking because they all start with I. So the first is going to be identification. Then it's going to be ice-breaking. Then we're going to look at impression, information gathering, and introductions. So let's talk about identification first. So you typically start off, when you meet someone, you need to identify or present yourself. Okay? So typically, this is where you're going to identify yourself. Who are you? What do you do? If you're chasing people, of course, then you also need to tell them why are you getting in touch. So this is where a tried and trusted tool comes very much to mind, and it's called the elevator pitch. From the name, you can see that it owes its origin to the United States. In Europe, we typically call it a lift. The Americans call it an elevator. And the reason why they call it an elevator pitch is that it asks you to imagine yourself in a lift with the person that you want to network with. And you've only got 20 seconds, okay, to talk about yourself, talk before the other person gets out of the lift. So, you've just got one shot and very limited time. So this is why elevator pitch is very useful. It's very useful to be able to craft your own elevator pitch because once you have it at hand, it is easier to break the ice, to start talking with somebody than if you have to start from nothing at all, from a blank page. So how would you describe who you are and what you do? So I'm going to take you very simply through crafting your own elevator pitch. If you've never done this, then this could be your opportunity. Joe mentioned that you'll be able to also view this presentation after this. So, if you can go back to it and find the right time maybe to craft your elevator pitch, I think this could be a great opportunity for your networking. So you start off with, again, identifying your goal. So start by thinking about the objective of your pitch. I'm a firm believer, as you can see, of starting with why. I really believe that once you identify your goal, it just becomes much easier. So the question to ask yourself here is, why do I want to talk about myself? Okay? Now, it could be very different reasons for different people as well. The second part is where you explain what you do. So start your pitch by describing what it is that you actually do. Ideally here, focus on being someone who can solve people's problems. Essentially, most services, most products that sell are products and services that solve some sort of problem. So identify the problem that you solve and get people to understand how you can help them. Could be useful here as well to add some information or a statistic. I'm going to share with you an example at the end of these steps so that you can see an elevator pitch, what it looks like. But adding some information or even a statistic will show clearly the value in what it is that you do. So here what you're going to be asking yourself is the question, what do I want others to remember most about me? The lasting impression from this 20-second pitch. The next step to craft your elevator pitch would be to communicate your USP, okay? Your unique selling proposition. And this is where you need to diversify yourself from your competitors, essentially. Because if you just come across as being one of the rest, it's unlikely that you're going to be that memorable. So this is where you ask yourself the question, how is my product, how is my service different to my competitors? So, for example, fill in the blank. Okay, here I've got a sentence about a company who claims it organizes the world's information and makes it universally accessible. I don't think you have to work too hard to understand that that is Google. But notice the simplicity by which even something as vast as Google, can bring everything that it does into one simple sentence. So simplicity here is key. Keep it simple. So what do you do after you craft your elevator pitch? You then follow up with a question, and questions can be really important when networking. So after you communicate your USP or unique selling proposition, you need to engage the other person. Otherwise, it remains pretty much a monologue, isn't it? You talking about yourself. But you want a dialogue. You want the conversation to start, and questions are the best ways to engage people into conversation. So prepare what we call open questions. What are open questions? Typically, open questions are those questions which cannot be answered by a yes/no statement. Okay? Open questions are very useful to get people to talk about themselves. You will be using the opposite, which we call closed questions, the ones which typically are answered by yes, no, or a very specific answer, okay, later on in the conversation, when you want to get commitment. So shall we do business? That is a closed question, which you will eventually, ask towards the end so that the person can say yes, and let's shake on it. But if you ask that too soon, you're jumping the gun, as they say. So, how do we go on from there? So you've crafted what you do, who you are, what you do, your unique selling proposition, okay, and your question. Then you put it all together and you edit it. You edit it in such a way that it becomes no longer than, as I said, 20, maximum 30 seconds in length. So you'll need obviously to try it out, go in front of the mirror, record yourself, whichever way you like, and check whether when you say it in a natural voice, okay, it is any longer than 20 or 30 seconds. So your pitch needs to be short, snappy, okay, to the point, compelling. The shorter it is, the better in these cases. Remember, if you are even at a networking event, okay, you want pretty much to, as they say, work the room, not just one or two people. That's a pretty expensive networking event if you just manage to network with just one or two people. You want to, reach as many people as possible. So you do need to keep your elevator pitch, as they say, short and snappy. So how about yes, finally, of course, then you need to practice it. And I can't overestimate the importance of practice because, as probably some of you are thinking, but I don't want to sound like I'm, prepared a speech and there I am, in my mind, they can see me reading out this elevator speech. Well, the only way to do this is really by practicing. The more you practice it, the more natural your pitch will become. Okay, and it's fine to change words. You don't have to remember it word for word. It's the essence that is important. I find myself using my same elevator speech according to the event, to the audience I'm addressing. Even though I have one, it's the same one pretty much on my LinkedIn profile. But then I would adapt it accordingly. So you want it to sound smooth. You want it to sound natural, not an aggressive sales pitch. So this is where I recommend practicing it either in front of a mirror so that you can hear yourself. Better still, practice it in front of friends, people who can give you good feedback, unfiltered feedback. They can give you real feedback so that you can adjust it until it sounds natural. So let me give you an example of an elevator speech. So here we've got an elevator speech which takes into consideration all the steps that I've just mentioned. So here, my company develops mobile applications that businesses use to train their staff remotely. This is what I do. This means that senior managers can spend time on other important tasks. This is the benefit. Unlike other similar companies, we visit each organization to find out exactly what people need. That is the unique selling proposition. On average, 95% of our clients say they are happy with the first version of their app. That is the statistic that really reinforces what you've just been saying. Can I ask, how does your organization handle the training of new people? So you see, very naturally, you've gone from talking about yourself to engaging the other person into a conversation. So, it's not just a sales pitch. It's a prelude to you engaging in a conversation. we've talked about crafting a scripted elevator speech, and a lot of people ask me, but how important are the words I use? I'm not Shakespeare. You don't have to be Shakespeare. You have to be natural. You have to talk about things that you know about. These are things about yourself and about your passion, your products, your services. Well, turns out, this is a study from Dr. Albert Mehrabian, going back quite a few years, but still very relevant, that the actual words that we say only account to about 7% of communication, of meaning. What is the rest made up of? The rest we're talking about 93. Well, 38% is down to the voice, the tone, and 55% is also down to the body language. As Mae West once was quoted as saying, it's not what you say, how you say it. Of course, she said it's a different context than networking, what we're describing today. But it is not so much the words that you use, it's also about how you say it. So I'd like to take a few minutes just to underline the importance here of using your body language, using your voice. And this is something that not enough people pay attention to. Now, we're not saying that words are useless. We're not saying that words are not important. Of course they are. Okay? You can't just talk rubbish and expect yourself to be interesting. But when we say something, if that whatever we're saying is not backed up by whatever people see or hear, the likelihood, as we've seen with that statistic, is that people will believe what they hear and what they see. Okay? So this is why it's important also to ensure that your body language and your tone of voice are saying the same things that your words are saying. If you want your networkers, your networking partner to understand how enthusiastic you are about your products, your services, then it's not going to come only from the words, it's going to come mainly from how you say it, your words, your body language. So let's look at a few very simple instances. Eye contact is probably the most basic of body language cues that you give the other person that you're interested in them. Look at that picture. Okay? It's immediately obvious when a person doesn't keep eye contact with you, he or she is not interested in what you're saying. So be very conscious that you're keeping eye contact. This is very important, especially when you are in networking events, because part of you is having a conversation with one person, but also looking around who else is in the room. That gives the wrong signals to the person you are trying to do business with, trying to establish contact with. So eye contact is undoubtedly very important. The second is what you do with your arms, what you do, how you keep your arms as well. And a lot of people say, oh, but I never know what to do with my arms. Well, our brains and our hands in particular, they're connected very, very well. Neurologically, our brains and our hands in particular, they're connected extremely well. So our hands typically express what it is that is what we're talking about, thinking about, feeling as well. Us Southern Europeans tend to have no problem usually with using our hands for expression. But be careful with certain arm movements and certain positions, because they can give the impression that you're not interested. You might not intend to. But this is where it's important for you to notice your own body language. This is why I also tend to advise people to attend, especially if they're starting out in networking events, to go with someone else, not to go on their own, so that the other person, can also give you some feedback about your own body language, tone of voice, what you said, how you conducted yourself, etc. Take someone who you trust to give you unfiltered feedback. What about stance, position? You can see again from this picture here on the slide. There are certain positions that we put our body in when we are interested. What you see there with the lady on the right is what we call the thinker pose, the computer pose, where as soon as somebody puts their hands resting on their other arm, their elbow on the other arm and strokes their chin, it makes people feel as if they're thinking about what you're saying. They're interested. So there's a lot that can be done, with our pose. of course, the face. The face has, I believe, over 40 different muscles, in this small part of our body. And we can do tens of thousands of expressions, micro expressions, that can give off very slight but very meaningful insights into how we feel with the other person. And this is where we create what we call rapport, where we make it easy for the other person to want to talk to us, to want to listen to us as well. And we don't do that because we're important or because we, the first thing we do is that how we conduct ourselves with our body, our voice, tone, etc., makes the other person feel comfortable in our presence. So maintaining an interested facial expression goes hand in hand with maintaining eye contact. Are you smiling? Are you holding back a yawn? Are you showing interest? What does your face say? We also talk about handshakes. Now here I'm saying when appropriate. And I think this is an important point that especially a lot of you will be doing businesses on a global level with different cultures. And culture is something which is important. We don't have enough time to go too deep into this concept, but it is important to understand the cultures you are doing business with. And there are certain cultures where, for example, a handshake might not be the appropriate form of greeting. I remember once being introduced to a Saudi Arabian woman, and obviously my arm, instinctively went out to shake her hand, and suddenly I realized I had my hand in midair, and her partner, he told me, women in our culture, they're not allowed to, they're not permitted to shake a man's hand unless he is part of their immediate family. So it is important to understand culture as well. The other thing I wanted to mention is proxemics. How close do you get to a person? And here again, a number of studies show that there are different levels of how close you get to a person. So we can talk about the intimate, which is typically between 0 and 50 centimeters, half a meter. If you get close to that person, you're telling that person, I feel quite intimate. But remember, that person might not feel the same way towards you. So, when we are networking, we're typically starting off from a social distance, which is between 1 and 4, and getting closer, the more, the deeper we get into conversation with the other person. So eventually, we get to roughly between, half and 1 meter away from that person. As a good rule of thumb, it is roughly, a hand's width distance, so that if you reach out your hand for a handshake, the other person doesn't have to lean into, but is not closer than that. So proxemics can be very important. This can also be useful when you see, for example, a group of people having a conversation. How close do you get involved? It sounds like an interesting conversation, and you approach, and you start off by being, a social distance away, and then, 1 or 2 of them might notice you, and, visually they might make a visual cue, join in, come in. And that's where you join in a closer circle and you move closer. So these are all, there are no rules, of course, but there are certain things which you need to feel and to be very conscious about. People giving you very subtle hints about, I want you to get closer, or this is too close, move back. Remember also that, I mentioned this earlier, that you are the brand. So, look your best. Make sure that you are representing your best. Now, I chose a photo here of 2 people in suits. Now, maybe your business is not of the suit and tie type, and that's absolutely fine, But it is important that how you look, whether it is the what you're wearing, your grooming, the shine on your shoes, all the way to the cologne or perfume you're wearing, is consonant with the message you are trying to put out there. And connected to this is our tangibles, the physical things that you actually hand out. And typically, with networking, we talk a lot about the business card, right? Every detail counts. make sure that if you are taking business cards, physical business cards, I'm going to talk about alternatives shortly. If you are taking physical business cards, that they don't look as if the dog slept on them, that they don't look as if they're faded, you know. They need to be, you know, representing you as well. So it's very important that, you know, even the type of stationery, whether you give them a brochure, business card, etc., it is of the highest quality. Talking about business cards, a lot of people nowadays tell me, should we still use business cards in 21st century? Well, I think business cards for a lot of people are still the go-to tool to leave their details, the contact details. Very important, because people might not remember your name. People might try to Google you and, you know, find someone else with a similar name, and, you know, so it's important to leave something. But nowadays we have much more powerful tools. One thing that I would definitely recommend is using LinkedIn's QR codes. So these can be found if you download the latest version of LinkedIn. I don't work for LinkedIn, nor do I receive any commissions from LinkedIn to do this, but I do believe LinkedIn is probably the best way to use. There are other QR codes though, if you would like to use them. And to share your QR code. You will see my QR code at the end of this presentation, for example. Okay, so all it takes is for the other person to scan through their LinkedIn your QR code on your LinkedIn via phone, okay, or tap, and they have all your details. It makes remembering who was who much easier. If you're still using physical business cards, then it's good practice to prepare some sort of system how you're going to file them. Because I know a lot of people who just throw them at the bottom of a drawer and then just, you know, frantically look for a business card. You know, a good system to file your business card either by category or by importance or by, you know, when you're going to contact them, whether it is within the next week or the next few months, etc., or how, you know, how hot a prospect is, you know, that is vital. Okay, so we go next to ice breaking. Now, a lot of people tell me this is where I get stuck, because, you know, we go, hello, my name is, oh, I'm terrified, you know, and this is where I want you to remember what I said earlier about, you know, being more concerned with what other people, what you're doing for other people than for what you're doing for yourself. So this is where we can use small talk, first of all, to break the ice. Okay, so although small talk might sound as if it's almost derogatory, you know, I hate small talk, people say, but small talk can be a very effective way of breaking the ice. So when we come to small talk, what do? We find things in common. So think about the people in the same networking event. What do they already have in common with you? Well, they're at the same event. So you can say something like, how did you hear about this event? You know? It's not the most important question you'll be asking during the event, but it leads you into a conversation. The venue, you're both at the same venue. What a beautiful venue. Have you been here before? Again, you're finding something in common. Getting to the event, sometimes, especially if you're attending overseas events, was it easy for you to get here this morning? Okay. Notice they are all questions. Questions have this ability of engaging the other person. Weather, okay? We tend to talk about the weather very often as a way of, you know, breaking the ice. Why? Because the weather is neutral. So I would not talk about politics, you know, I would not talk about certain news which could, you know, Black Lives Matter, because, you know, it could be a subject which could be divisive. You might start off on the wrong foot when you realize that the other person might have completely divergent views from you. Weather. I sure miss the warm weather back home. Do you have better weather where you come from? So notice, although they are very simple, they're not what you want to talk about, but they break the ice. They allow you to move into a dialogue. The next part is the impression. What impression do I want to leave behind? So avoid making people feel that you're just there using them as a source of information. Show a genuine interest in them. So spend much more time asking questions and listening rather than talking about yourself. So let me give you an example. Rather than saying something like, hey Alex, great to meet you, I am Jez. Okay? You might say something like this, for example. Hey Alex, it's great to meet you, I'm Jez. I hear that you recently attended the Apex conference in Dubai. I'm interested in attending next year. I'd love to hear about your experience. How was it? Okay? In a very natural way, you're showing that your main interest is about them first. Okay? You will get the chance, of course, to ask for introductions, business, etc. But this should not be the first step towards networking. So aim to be more interested than interesting. Okay? This, I believe, is what allows also you to be able to calm down. My work is as a trainer, as a coach. I do mostly, I would say mainly 70% of my work is training, which means I have to stand up in front of total strangers and spend the good part of a day, every day, talking to them at length. That is not me during my weekends. I am naturally not the most loquacious, I'm not the most how shall I say, I'm not at the center of activity if I were at a party or anything like that. So it's nothing to do with your personality. So some people tell me, I'm not the networking type, and I say, why? And I say, because I'm an introvert. You know, it's not about you. You know, and this is what helps me also to relax before, and I do, even though I've now been doing training for a number of years, I do feel a bit uneasy just before I start training. And that is where I think about, what am I going to give my trainees? When I stop thinking about myself and concentrate more on them, that is where I also calm down. Because it's not about me. It's not about my performance. It's not a performance. Networking is not about acting. Okay? Yes, I showed you how to get an elevator pitch together, but it's not about you. Ultimately, it's about them. It will come back to you. We're coming to the end. You come now to where you are going to get information from them, okay? So this is the fourth step, information gathering. So take a few minutes, again, before speaking to someone, before networking with someone new, think about the questions you might want to ask them. What information are you after? How can you probe gently for it without sounding like you're interrogating them, okay? So this is where you're going to show interest again, okay, without you showing yourself to be like a sleazy car salesman. And this leads us to introductions. We said the importance of networks is because it allows us not only to get in touch with a number of people, okay, but also who they know. So sometimes our networking is not just about getting information from them, but more importantly, asking them to introduce us to somebody that they know. So often what you might need is an introduction to someone else, further contacts that you can speak to. So you could use something like this. For example, you were talking about company X earlier. Do you happen to know anyone else that I could talk to about that, okay, about that project or whatever? So in a very simple way, you can now, move into, asking people to give you, okay? But people will only want to give you easily once you have shown interest in them. Some words of advice: don't linger too long, okay? Especially at networking events. Try to meet and speak to and network with as many people as you can. So, as they say about house guests, this comes from Benjamin Franklin. Fish and house guests smell after 3 days. With networking, I would say after spending about 8-10 minutes with somebody, you'll want to move on. Otherwise, you can get stuck to just one person. Now, if that person happens to be the main reason why you are at that networking event, then that's absolutely fine. But if you're looking at broadening your network, then after about 8 to 10 minutes, you might want to, move on to another person. So this is the great opportunity for you to exchange the business cards, the contact details, agree. What's the best way of keeping in touch? Okay? Find what is appropriate for the other person, and move on. Work the room. See as many people as you can, especially if you're attending a networking event. This can be really important. Finally, we come to maintaining your network. Just like anything, if you don't maintain your network, it doesn't function as well. So this is where you need to put some effort, especially after networking events. Immediately afterwards, get in touch with them, hook up with them via LinkedIn if they're on LinkedIn. If not, maybe send them an email. Keep people in mind. Send them maybe a Christmas card, Christmas, occasional phone call, occasional email. Share with them things that you think that they might be interested in. You need to maintain your network regularly. Otherwise, people will start to forget who you are. So I hope that I've been able to give you some practical ways of you to build your network, for you to even start crafting your elevator speech, those of you who might still be new to this networking. More importantly, I hope I've taken out the sting for a lot of you of networking, because I know a lot of people feel very, very, I wouldn't say shy, almost afraid, even terrified of networking. And if you remember my advice, it's not about you, it's about them. Think about how you can help others. I believe very much in the principle of reciprocity. People will eventually reciprocate and will want to listen to your story after you've listened to theirs. So, as I've told you, there you go. Those are my details. This is me networking with you, and I hope to be able to network maybe at some point face to face. But there you see the QR code from my LinkedIn profile. So this is the 21st century. Use technology, use the tools available at your fingertips for you to be able to grow and maintain your network.
Jess, thanks a lot. This is really interesting. I'm sure we have a lot of questions because a lot of us, do networking on a daily basis. In fact, I want to start with a question or, two parts of the same question, I hope, that I have. One of the main challenges I find in networking, and especially abroad, more than in Malta, is, you're working a room, essentially, as you mentioned, and it's hard for me, at least, to remember what I spoke to you about, right, as against what I spoke to someone else about. Yes. You can't, I guess, write at the back of a business card every time because it doesn't look good. How do you do that? One, and second, related to it, how do you, end a conversation if it's absolutely not interesting?
Right, yes. Two very interesting questions. You're absolutely right. Business cards, either because of their size or sometimes even the way they're laid out, do not give you much opportunity to write much about them. I tend, personally, as soon as I move away from one person I've just networked with, before I go straight to the other person, make a few mental notes. And this is where I typically do them digitally. I think it's easy for you to do them digitally. You can even, if you want, even record yourself a digital note. And this is where being able to have the digital business card allows you to make a digital note very easily about someone. So if I've just met Joe and Joe's told me about his involvement with Trade Malta, it's very easy, especially if I've tried to network with as many people as possible, to confuse Joe with Joseph, who I've met somewhere else, and I can't remember who is who. Of course, the business card might help and whatever, but if we've discussed something specific, I would say I would take a mental, a physical note, not a mental note, immediately after I meet Joe. So just take it only takes a few seconds. But you can either record it on your mobile phone with your voice, a voice recording. There are so many apps nowadays to do this, or even just notes, just to make a note. Spoke to Joe about this particular project. We'll call him, agreed to call him next week. I've got his number. Okay, so that's the first one. You mentioned the second one,
closing off an uninteresting conversation.
Yes, and we mentioned rapport, right? And we mentioned how you build rapport with your body language. But sometimes you need to break rapport and to move on. So you need to give also signals to the other person that I'm going to close. And this is where both with your words, but more importantly also with your facial expressions, body language, etc., you start to close. You know, the good presenters, for example, will signal the end of their presentations, the end of their speech. They start saying, and in order to close, or finally, you know, they sort of signal to the audience, I'm closing now. So the audience is prepared. I would say in networking, the most natural way of closing is, as I mentioned, exchanging details. You know, typically you don't start off by exchanging details, and the worst networkers I came across are the ones who come up to me and immediately just hand me their business card. You know, leave the business card, leave the contact details till the end. It makes it for a very smooth transition towards, here's my business card, let's keep in touch. What is the best way to keep in contact with you? Email? Okay. Perfect. Okay, so let's agree to keep in touch via email, or let's chat this evening if we're going to meet for lunch, for dinner, or whatever.
Another thing which is related is, you know, the balance between being too direct, you know, being very transparent that you've kind of rehearsed an elevator pitch, and at the same time being, you know, being too forward on one side and being too indirect on the other side.
Yes.
It's a balance, because at the end of the day, you know, we're all there to network, but you don't want to make it obvious that you're selling.
Yeah. With the elevator pitch, as I said, you know, practice does make perfect. Not only so that you can remember it by heart. Sometimes when people remember things by heart, it comes out mechanical. So it's not so that you can recite it, you know, backwards. That's not the point. The point is so that you don't have to work with a blank slate. The point is that you have a skeleton on which you can build a starting point. Remember, it's just an introduction at the end of the day. Now, if I'm going to be talking to you, even though I can be talking, even though my line of business can do, say, life coaching, I might want to direct myself towards the leadership coaching that I do. So this is where I would put the emphasis of my elevator pitch. You need to be able to play around with it. Now, this is what practice allows you to do. The more you are familiar with your elevator pitch, the more you've used it, the more you can play around with it. You know, it's not a script that you just take out and read out mechanically. How to come across not so aggressive? Well, of course, that is also to do with putting your interest before other people's interest before your own interest. I think if, just like when we go into a shop, if the salesperson shows interest first about what it is that you need, sir, you know, when I walk into the shop, before telling me, oh, we've got this, we've got that, we've got these products, etc., then I am much more likely to trust that salesperson. So again, you know, that salesperson can be more effective if he shows me that he is interested in my needs, my needs as a customer. There again, if I'm networking with you, if I'm going to show that I'm interested in what you need and how I can satisfy those needs as well, then it works as a reciprocity, and it tones down the sales aggression that I might naturally...
Exactly. Which can be dangerous.
Which can be dangerous,
in
yes.
these situations. I want to move on to kind of online, you know, networking. We've talked about mostly in here, you know, live networking in a networking event, but, you know, today people network with people they don't know via LinkedIn, via Facebook. Right. Are there any, you know, hints there, or any, you know, from your experience?
Yes, I think an important distinction must be made between, you mentioned the two probably most popular platforms, Facebook and LinkedIn. While Facebook is more of a social network, I tend, for example, myself to have very different groups of people. The people on my Facebook are the people who, I know not everyone does this, but are the people who I genuinely consider that I have something in common already. Okay, that is not the same case for my LinkedIn network. I've networked with people who are, people, leaders I admire, who don't know me, wouldn't recognize me if I called them and I said, hi, I'm Jez Camilleri, but I want to learn from them. So I've connected with them purely because I admire them and I really want to learn from them. It'd be great if they want to learn something from me, but that's not the entire reason. So I think we need to be aware of making a distinction, and I tend to prefer making a distinction between my social network and my professional network. Now, of course, there are overlaps. There will be overlaps, especially in a small place like Malta. That's bound to happen locally. But internationally, I try to make sure that I keep the two separate. Now, just because I have X number of followers, or more likely network people on my network, it doesn't mean I have actually networked with them. I would say for you to be able to say that you are actually networking online, you need to exchange something one-to-one. So if you are not going to be in a specific face-to-face environment with this person who you'd like to network with, and he's part of your LinkedIn network, then try to get into direct contact. Even though obviously you might not be able to do it physically, share something with that particular person. Get in touch directly with that person before you start to bombard him or her with material and marketing stuff.
We have just an interesting question by a participant on the proxemics you mentioned. Saying proxemics, of course, depend on cultures.
Yes, they do.
Different cultures, I guess, have different parameters on
Yes,
proxemics. Can you tell us something about that?
Yes, they do. And we can see this. Us Southern Europeans, we tend to immediately get very close. It's very, and of course, we're generalizing here, and I don't want to fall into stereotypes. But, stereotypes are what allow us to help us understand, generalizations. So with Southern Europeans in particular, we touch each other as well. Even people we don't know well. We tend to handshake. Some other cultures grab the entire arm. Some people might even move in for a kiss, a peck on the cheek, etc. Even with people who they've just met. This is exactly why I mentioned that if you are going to be doing business with specific cultures, it is good to invest some time learning about that culture, understanding. I find I've worked in education. Our students came from all over the world, from South America, from Asia, Middle East, Africa, etc. And I noticed how important it was for me to understand, to be able to create that rapport that I mentioned earlier, by being aware of certain cultural norms. So, for example, with the Asians, there's a certain distance that is maintained when people do business. So it's important for you to learn about these cultural differences. A very important point. And when you want to do business with a culture, I think you do need to understand. We are living in a globalized society. You're absolutely right. So these things are becoming more and more sort of neutralized, harmonized. That's the right word.
But at the same time, the respect towards cultures, I guess you need to start by respecting the uniqueness of the culture.
Absolutely.
And if you're allowed, you harmonize.
Absolutely. It's the same way that I would, call someone Mr. Kushkiri, or Mr. Shkembri, but after some time, Joe would say, listen, stop calling Mr. Shkembri, I'm Joe, but you would allow the other person to let you in. I mentioned this as well for proxemics, standing, looking interested, but at a distance, and then the other person, clocks you with his or her eye, and sort of, just by a nod of the head, almost invites you to come closer and come closer. Okay, but there are no hard and fast rules here, but you need to be, sharp with your instincts, and you learn. I mentioned how I made a mistake with my handshake to somebody. I learned from that mistake that what comes naturally to me with other cultures, I need to be aware of.
Absolutely right. Something else I wanted to ask, in international business, and this is what we tell our clients at Trade Malta, you need to build networks, like you said, turn it into a skill, sharpen it as you go along and build it and build it. Is it wise to, attend kind of industry events only in a narrow sense and, in our industry only, or is it wise sometimes to widen that? To kind of network in different areas, in different industries, because everything is connected in the end. I'm not sure what you think about this.
You're absolutely right there. We tend to feel safe within our own similar people. We tend to like the comfort zone of being around similar people because we know we already have something in common with them. But as I showed, even when you are surrounded by people who are coming from a very diverse background with different industries, etc., there are always some things that you share in common with those people in the same room. The fact that you are at the same event, the fact that you are in the same location, the same venue, you're drinking the same wine, eating the same food, they can always be used as icebreakers, okay? But I would say, the fact that you are talking to somebody from a completely diverse background to you allows you to show even more interest, I would say, because you don't assume anything of the other person, and it's a win-win, really. You're becoming more knowledgeable about other people's backgrounds and industries, etc. But also, this is the whole idea of using creativity in business, isn't it? The ability to, understand that there's A and B which you previously thought did not go together, and suddenly you see a connection. And some of the great inventions of history, where people, took a product, took an application which nobody saw the direct application for, and came up with a genius application of a product previously intended for something completely different. So I think this is where people can be creative and interesting, I would say, where they can start to forge links between what they sell, what their product is about, and rather than seeing it very narrowly and limiting their market, and seeing the opportunity, to market to people who might not have, realized that they have that problem.
Especially because of the creativity which you've mentioned. Another dimension, another balance sometimes, and I wanted to ask you as well, because we have a question hinting in this direction. Is it better to kind of build your network with, large numbers of acquaintances, Facebook friends, LinkedIn connections, or is it better to focus on a few connections and turn them into relationships? Is there a balance there, or?
Yes, and it's a very good question, because on one hand, the greater the numbers, we started off by talking about Metcalfes Law and how, the value of a network is equal to the number of nodes squared, not just number of nodes itself. So the more, the merrier. But at the same time, you do need to balance that with certain depth, because I know people who either just give out business cards, as if they're Maltese, we say pastizzi, and yet have not taken the extra effort of establishing some depth to that relationship. So you do need to have both. I would say start off small, gaining some depth, but then start to build as well. Start to go out even of your comfort zone, as we mentioned earlier. So I would say start off looking at building quality networks, but don't rest on just maintaining that small, deep network. Of course, you will always have, just like with your Facebook friends, the people who you can communicate, to invite them for an event, a large public event, and there are those who you would invite to dinner at your home. And you need to have both. You need to have friends who you can feel completely at ease sharing the most intimate things, and those who you would just share news things. Same with networks. You're not going to have everyone at the same level. You're going to have those who you build very strong relationships, those who you keep at like a back burner. As soon as you see an opportunity, though, they are still warm enough in terms of like leads, to go back to them and not have to start from scratch. So you do need, that's why I mentioned maintaining your network. You need to maintain your network in such that it's there warm, there, so that when the opportunity arises, Joe, okay, I don't have to start from scratch saying, Joe,
Because
remember me? No,
a-
I have no idea who you are. Well, we met. Yes, I remember being there, but I can't.
Yeah. No, the idea, the concept of warm is really important. Obviously, it's easier when it's warm. The hardest, and I want to move into this question, is when it's cold. In the sense that when you are in a networking event, you know no one in this room,
Yes.
and you need to start doing
From scratch.
something.
Yes.
And there isn't much time because the actual conference is going to start. How do you have a tip on how do you kind of pluck the courage and just say, I'm going to go, on the first person who's completely random and introduce myself?
Yeah. I think we overestimate or exaggerate, how, what is the worst thing that can happen. So we tend to catastrophize, what is the worst thing that can happen if I go up to a person and he or she doesn't seem interested? You know what? The worst thing that can happen is I move on to the next one. It's not going to affect my who I am, what I think about myself, etc. So, let's put things into perspective first, because most of the time we get into this panic. What if they reject me? What if the person just says hello but has nothing else to say? Well, the worst thing that can happen is that you just exchange pleasantries and you move on to the next. So don't watch the voice in your head making you feel that it is a big deal. It's usually not a big deal. People are there for the same reason that you are, and people are human just like you and them. And just like you and them, they have interests, they have things which you have in common. So as I said, use the things which are obviously in common. The fact that they've attended the same conference, the fact that they've attended the same seminar. Use those, to break the ice. From the level of interest, gauge that level of interest to go a little bit deeper, one step at a time. You're not going to go straight into, do you want to do business with me? That would scare people away typically. That's the aggressive approach. Just be natural. Talk about, show interest in the other person. Talk about yourself in a very natural way. And gauge their interest. Not everyone, will warm up to you, and that's absolutely fine. You move on to the other person. So be careful, because a lot of times we have this voice in our head that we tend to let control our actions and catastrophize the situation. It's not usually a big deal. Nobody's going to make a fool of you in front of everyone. Most people are just as feeling just as uncomfortable maybe in that room as you are. So, you're in good company.
Yes, with those wise words, I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap it up here.
Sure.
But this has been really, really interesting. I'd like to thank the participants for the questions, for being with us today. To remind you that we have another interesting webinar next week on digital marketing strategies. So next week at the same time, please show your interest, and we'll send you the invite as we're doing now every week. And we have other webinars coming up, as I mentioned before, on Namibia as a country, on supply chain and finance by HSBC later on. So this has been really interesting. We will have the actual recording of the webinar of today, as well as the presentation on trademalta.org for those of you who want to consult them later on, and we'll be doing that after each and every webinar. So Jess Camilleri from Think Talent, thanks once again for being with us.
Joe.
Thanks to the participants. We'll meet you all again next week. Thank you very much.